This is episode 64 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Fiato. Today we're going to be talking about an experience that doesn't really have a lot of dialogue around it. There's not a lot of information about it, and yet it's an experience that many grapple with. And this is the experience of life after chronic illness or partial remission. Today, Daniela&nbsp will talk about why this time can be so difficult and confusing, the impact on life, relationships, work, and she'll deepen our understanding about how to navigate through this time in a meaningful way and to support others who are moving through this time as well. Daniela&nbsp is a marriage and family therapist with a private practice in Westlake Village. She provides online counseling to California residents and Americans abroad who are seeking support with medical illness, chronic pain, anxiety, and medical trauma. Daniela's own health challenges and chronic pain are what motivates her to seek new ways of helping families, caregivers, and those living with medical illness. You can find her in the community providing presentations on mindfulness, pain management, tapping, health psychology, and more. She also is a founding member of one of the largest health-based support groups on Facebook, where she volunteers her time and connects group members to resources and support. Hi, Daniela, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Lourdes. It's great to be back.
I'm so happy to have you for round 2. Your episode has been one of our most downloaded, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback. And so I'm excited to add to the meaningful information you shared in that first round.
Wow, that's great news. I had no idea, so thank you.
You're welcome.
No pressure.
So today, Daniela, we're talking about an interesting experience. It's a really nuanced experience. It's one that actually I didn't think about till you mentioned it. And, what this is the mental and emotional shift involved. So it's an inner process when a person's medical illness situation has improved, where their quality of life has improved, or when full remission of the condition has happened. And so I wanted to start first with asking how you were drawn to focus on this specific experience for a person.
Yeah, I think the reason I've explored it a little bit is because it's been a part of my own inner process. Like I had mentioned in that earlier interview with you, I have had health conditions and things that would be considered an invisible illness, where on the outside you look healthy, but on the inside you're not healthy and you have a lot going on that people just can't see and can't understand. So that has been my experience for about 8 years. And recently I went through a bit of a shift. I have been in remission for a particular condition. However, I was still having a lot of other health conditions. So for me, exploring this aspect of life after partial healing or remission in certain aspects is very personal, but it's also really discussed among people in this population, whether it's in a forum on Facebook or in support groups and things like that, if they're in this transitional stage. And I found it really interesting that I was going through this, and I just thought, wow, we should really try to bring this into the light more and kind of normalize what people might be going through, because it's confusing enough and hard enough to have relatively good health and then get a health condition or have a chronic illness condition. And then it's an equally awkward transition, and it can have its bonuses and, positives and negatives once you're in that shift of like, okay, I still have health issues, or for the most part, those health issues are gone, but now I'm trying to kind of get in touch with myself again, rediscover and re-experience life kind of how I did before things, took a turn where I got sick.
I can see how this can be a very, it's a positive time in that you're experiencing healing or have experienced some healing, but also disorienting for the person who's experiencing and possibly even confusing, and then confusing to the people in their world.
Absolutely. And for me, I had pretty major surgery in January, and it was all good. It was a planned surgery, and I was wanting the surgery, and that has significantly improved my quality of life. But things aren't 100%. And so that's still not that long ago. We're a few months out from that, and it's kind of coming to terms with, okay, post-surgery, this is now my new normal. This is how I'm going to, I'm going to get to know my body under these changes that have taken place. And that's an adjustment for the person going through it, and absolutely for family members and spouses, and just kind of getting to know yourself in this new way, and then starting to see, wow, I can do a lot more. I still have some, things I got to work through, but it's a good change. But then what really was interesting for me was like, okay, you mean, I have been going to doctor's offices for so long, it's become like a very much a normal thing. And then I see my doctor post-surgery, and he says after a second checkup, he's like, well, you don't have to come back. You can see me without a referral for like the next 5 years or 3 years or something. He's like, so off you go. Like, I'll see you later. And I was just like, what? We're friends now. Like, I don't understand what to do with this information.
Yeah.
I've gotten to know you, doctor, and the nurses and the receptionists so well. It's like, it was like an extended, support system. And now all of that's kind of gone.
Wow.
So that was really like a weird experience of like, whoa.
How you describe this just highlights how dealing with a chronic illness really determines the structure of your life, and it becomes, like you said, just the way it is. And to describe this shift afterwards as trying to figure out a new normal just really speaks to how significant this is, how big it is. And when the space opens up, from the medical appointments, from everything else that went with that chronic illness, you're left with, how do I fill up this space? What goes into this space?
Exactly. And all that time and energy, like I had created a system of like, okay, I'm going to, there's like, I really would like to have two Danielas, in my life. One, just to focus on therapy work and running a private practice. And then the other one, just focus on, getting better and going to the doctor. And so trying to kind of balance that out. And now it's like, oh, like you said, that huge chunk of time and energy now is freed up, and it's like this vacuum. It's like, oh, and it's kind of scary because it's like I've gotten so used to it, and it's like, okay, shoot, now what do I do with that time? You mean I don't have to, put all these steps and self-care things in place all the time anymore that don't take up all this like time in my day? Like, what am I going to do with myself now? This is like, it's liberating, but it's a sudden change, and you're just like, okay.
So you've shared that that many people who experience this can relate to this experience. Can you share how this experience can manifest in different ways? Like, for example, in relationships, work, school, that type of thing.
Yeah, so relationships, if you're a caregiver and your loved one has been going through, something that's been going on for years and years, there's that shift that happens in the family system or in that support system of like, okay, these are the roles that the caregiver is going to take on. Your friends maybe some friendships will become more distant if you're going through health stuff because they don't really know how to connect or support you, or it makes them really feel uncomfortable because they hate to see you in pain or whatever it is. Or perhaps certain relationships, whether it's, boyfriend or spouse or girlfriend, those could get stronger and more interconnected when someone's going through health issues. And the same with friendships. So it's like a moving piece, and it's just kind of interesting to observe how people in your circle, whether you're in an intimate relationship with them, or if they're coworkers, or if they're friends, or former college roommates, whatever they are, how much they're going to either be in your life when you're going through it or not be in your life. And the same shift can kind of happen after you kind of get out of that place of being in a chronic illness, chronic pain situation. And so maybe you had really close friendships that became even stronger because your friend was, visiting you once a week because it was hard for you to leave the house, and you would have like a movie night, or, whatever kind of a little routine you had set up. But now that you're better, your friend is like, well, what is my place now? How do I fit into this relationship with this friend? Like, I don't want to now impose on her because now she can like go and do more things. And, so there can be a struggle in getting your bearings, whether it's you as the person with the health issues and transitioning out of that into a healthier way of life and a more liberating way of life. And the same for those people too, because they're just trying to figure out, well, now what? How do I fit into this friend of mine's new life now that they've had a procedure or have now partial remission or total remission or whatever it is?
Oh, that's really fascinating. I was thinking how, just that inner process of, if you're the friend, going with the example you just gave, who was visiting, wondering, okay, if I am not in contact with my friend as much and spending as much time with them, will they feel that I don't care anymore? It's just, and I can see how that shift of no longer having those weekly visits or however, whatever the frequency and whatever they did, that the absence of that can trigger a lot of, feelings and questions. And for the person who has experienced some healing, going through that as well, perhaps some of the same questions when they were ill and friends were no longer as active in their lives. And now that they're healing or at a better place, experiencing something similar.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting because there can definitely be misunderstandings in that transitional stage. It's like, if we were really close when I was sick and now you're more distant, like the person going through the healing is like, well, what? Maybe they have this thinking of like, what, you only wanted to be my friend when I was down and out and like and relying on you? Like, what kind of friendship is that? Like, that's messed up. Like, maybe that's the train of thought that happens.
Yeah.
But likewise, the person who's the friend could just feel like, I don't know my place. I don't know my role now in our friendship because you really needed me in these certain ways. And I was more than happy to be there for you because I love you and care for you. But now your wings have flown. And, I don't know my place in our friendship. So having a conversation obviously would be good because otherwise there can just be this awkward, like, misunderstanding and you don't want that to happen.
And I think this also speaks to the importance of that realization that whenever anyone changes significantly, it affects everybody around them,
Exactly.
Because if I change, then you will relate to me differently. And so that's almost just part of the human experience. And so allowing for that. And what I love about what you're talking about right now, Daniela, too, is it speaks to how it gives permission for people to be different roles in our lives at different times. Like there are some people who are very comfortable with those concrete expressions, of, I'll come over and bring you dinner. I'll do your groceries. I'll spend time with you. And there are other people that's not their way of supporting, but it doesn't mean that they're not concerned or they don't care or they don't love you. And so I think this also can highlight that this can be something that is stirred up during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. We only know what our own personal experiences are. And so if there's like a friend or a family member who's been distant at some points in your journey of illness to health or partial remission, we don't know what's going on within themselves. Maybe them being around us when we're not well is like triggering for them, and it's reminding them of something, that they went through with someone they know or something like that. So when you're sick and when you're hurting and when you have a hard time getting out of bed, it's just, these are not really processes and deep thoughts that can really be accessed very easily because you're just trying to survive. You're just trying to get support. But when you kind of move out of that space into a place of healing or having better insight and going, okay, this is where I was and I'm so much better now. And in hindsight, I can see, how much I've improved. When you're kind of out of the fog, I'd say, then it's maybe easier to kind of think about these things more with greater depth and go, okay, well, maybe they were distant because it reminded them too much of this situation. Like maybe that's what's going on. And I'll just, leave them be and give them space and do my best to not take it personally because it seems to be more about them and their own comfort zone.
So what are some of the misconceptions that those who are experiencing this might have around this experience? What might come up for someone who is experiencing, some partial healing or complete healing, and now they're moving forward into this next phase of living? What are some of the misconceptions they might have around this experience that can get in their own way of really, I guess, moving through this in a more conscious and as positive way that they can?
I would say, the one example I can think of is, let's say someone had like major surgery. I wonder why I'm bringing that one up. An easy one to bring up right now. You get when I work with people who maybe have had some kind of major surgery that's like life changing, it changes their lifestyle, things like that. It's kind of like, okay, just because you had this surgery or this procedure that's going to address X, Y, and Z symptoms doesn't mean it's all magically going to like poof, go away. Like it's not the magical pill. So your head might be in the clouds after surgery while you're healing because you're like, oh my God, I'm free now. I don't feel like I'm bogged down by my body anymore. And and so maybe that's a bit of a honeymoon phase if that's kind of been someone's experience. But then kind of things start to kind of settle and you start to get used to the changes that have happened. And you're like, okay, things are still better. I'm keeping it all in perspective, but it's not all rainbows and butterflies. Like I still have these other things that this surgery didn't address, sadly. Or I had a feeling, or I knew this, but man, that honeymoon phase was awesome.
Yeah.
It was a nice moment of elation, and now I'm going to kind of switch gears to be more like based in reality and like, okay, looking at the big picture. Post-surgery quality of life, how was that? Well, it was in this space, maybe it wasn't so great. Post-surgery, it's in a better space. So, okay, so looking at it like that, how I think can help people to cope. I see this a lot with people who have chronic autoimmune conditions where they go through treatment after treatment and they try this one and they go with this doctor and that doctor and then they get super excited that I'm doing 2 weeks of this treatment protocol and then this thing's going to be gone. And it's like, and they get their hopes up really high and then, oh no, actually, I still have symptoms. So just like it was maybe for that person who was going through health issues back in the day, trying to just keep a level head and like a realistic optimism. Like you can have hope and be optimistic, but kind of anchor it in some kind of reality and keep it in context of the big picture of like, okay, so these are the steps. These are the things that I can now do now that I'm on this healing path and I'm doing better. Do I still have to do X, Y, and Z for my own self-care? Yes, but I don't have to do it as much, or I don't have to do it as often, or whatever it is. So it's a coming to terms with and acknowledging the shift, but in the big scheme of things, keeping in mind, gosh, it's still not perfect and it will never be perfect. And this is my new normal now. And that's okay because my quality of life is better. I feel more comfortable talking about it now. I'm not maybe so emotional and so down on myself because I have so much physical pain going on, or at least I'm not there anymore in that time of life that was really painful, physically and emotionally painful. So I guess that's my really long-winded way of trying to explain it.
No, that was great. So it's really, if you're not able to be in, I guess, a more grounded, realistic place as far as the way that you understand your experience, that crash from that high elation can be really difficult. And so that makes a lot of sense that it's, when you were talking, I couldn't help but think about just a normal relationship development. There's always that honeymoon period.
Yes.
Every relationship has that, and it always ends,
Exactly. The honeymoon
And
is over.
that's actually when the real relationship begins, is when all of that falls away and you're looking at each other as two flawed human beings and moving forward with that. And so I think maybe seeing this as a natural state and to understand that this is how it unfolds could really help someone and protect them from potentially really, really painful emotions and feelings.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. It's like, you had to form a new relationship with yourself when you were sick and you maybe didn't recognize yourself. You're like, who is this person? I don't know who this is. Like, I used to have all this energy, now I don't. And so it's like this awkward, angry, like I have to acknowledge you, in this relationship, and then you kind of come to terms maybe with where things are at, and then you kind of have to go through the same shift after you get better and form a new relationship with yourself and go, okay, so the old me was like this, and now the new me is showing up in these different ways. And instead of being harsh or critical, just acknowledging and like being compassionate. Like you've been through a lot, like pat yourself on the back. You've been through a lot. This has been a long ordeal, and just kind of reacquaint yourself with your new self, with this newer, evolved person who's gone through all of these life experiences.
So, Daniela, for the loved ones, family, and friends of this individual who has experienced some healing, what are some of the ways that they get tripped up in this area?
I think it's just trying to find their place in the relationship. Once their loved one no longer needs them to the extent that they were needed in the past, and everyone wants to be needed in whatever kind of dynamic or relationship. And so that can be awkward. It can kind of be scary, just like things might be scary for the person getting better because they're like, what do I do with my new self now that I have this more time and freedom? Like, this is great, but kind of scary. And the same can be for caregivers. Like, there was a routine. I used to do this and that for my spouse, and now they don't need me to do that anymore, and then they might feel kind of like unneeded. And, and maybe them being able to provide all of that care and support helped them to feel validated in some way in how their relationship evolved. And so how can they create a new relationship with each other where they're each being validated and acknowledged and valued now that things have changed? So that's kind of an awkward one. It can be an awkward shift.
Because I can see that when, you've put a lot of care and time, resources, energy into, your loved one, supporting them through this illness, that can almost become your identity, especially depending on the severity and the length of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I can see how one of the things that can happen in the space that is created by the healing process for both the individual experiencing the healing and their loved ones is the energy, the healing that was put into that space, or for the person who is experiencing the illness or the condition, the attention on their lifestyle and what they were eating. Once that space has cleared because there has been healing, a lot of other issues that you maybe didn't have the time or space to deal with because you were dealing with the immediate present of the illness can suddenly, just like water spilling into a container, it can fill that up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just like the relationship you're kind of coming to terms with within yourself when you're better and healed, you're like, okay, now I don't have to occupy my mental space with this anymore. But now all these deeper, things about self-doubt or whatever inner processes like I'm trying to deal with individually, like that I kind of suppressed maybe because I just didn't have the time or energy back during this time of going through a health condition. Now all of that's coming up again. Whatever wasn't really addressed or acknowledged back then is going to come up now. And the same with relationships. So if there was something that, maybe was brewing with one or both people in the relationship, now that there's more time and space for them as independent individuals in a relationship, not with this third party being the illness. It's like, okay, well, now that's not a part of our dynamic anymore. And gosh, we can kind of get back to some of the other things that maybe were under the radar for so long because it wasn't a priority in the big scheme of things. But now let's
Yeah.
explore it.
You
So it
know,
can be that too.
I just thought of something when you were speaking, Daniela. One of the things we always hear about is, the empty nest syndrome.
Yes.
When the kids leave home, there's a space that's created. And for the parents, that space can be, maybe it's one of the parents has really just put her life on hold and put all her heart and soul into her children. And then when the children leave, it's, okay, what do I do with myself? What is my life about? What is my purpose? And this can be very disorienting. I have had clients who have come in after their last child has left for college or has moved out, and they are suddenly, feeling a little bit lost at sea in the sense of, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know why I get up every day. Or they realize that caring for their children kept them distracted from their anxiety or the depression, or with some couples, the reality of the relationship, which is why it's not uncommon to see many couples end up divorcing after the last child leaves home.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a real struggle for people who have a history of having health conditions to come to terms individually on how much do they identify themselves with their illness. It's like on a spectrum. Some people are like, I am so and so and I have lupus, or whatever their condition is. And other people are like, this is who I am and this is another aspect of my life, but it doesn't define me. And I would say that's a general consensus. People who've gone through some kind of illness, it's like it's a part of my history, it's a part of who I am today, but I am not my illness. And so the same goes for, caregivers. Like you say, it can be a sense of identity. Oh, who are you? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Oh, I'm so and so, and I'm a caregiver for my spouse. It just kind of becomes second nature. And so you're right. Like when that has changed and they no longer really are technically the caregiver, it's kind of a bit of a shock to the system. Like, oh shoot, well, who am I? How do I tell others who I am? I don't even know myself now because I've gotten so used to being this role, taking on this role as the parent of a child, my child who had health issues, or the spouse to, my husband who's been sick for so long. And now all of that's kind of magically kind of shifted. And now what? So it might sound cheesy, but like you've kind of alluded to, like a little bit of an identity crisis,
Yeah.
like. And also for people who have been sick, it's like me. Okay, I still have health issues. I am now in remission for a particular issue, and I still do a lot of work and advocacy for these people with this particular condition. But then a part of me is like, well, who am I? Who am I to be helping in any capacity as an advocate or whatever when I don't have it anymore? Like,
Yeah.
Like who do I think I am?
Yeah.
Or what that famous phrase of imposter syndrome, and caregivers probably have that too. Maybe they had a loved one who had cancer and now, their spouse is doing better or their, loved one, family member is in remission, but they're still actively involved in the local cancer support center in their neighborhood. And maybe they're kind of having some conflicts within themselves. It's like, well, I have a lot of personal life experience, and
Yeah.
so I can bring a lot of value and help others in this way, but maybe I don't belong here anymore. Those are some things that can kind of come up for people, or it doesn't at all. I mean, we're all so unique in our way of going through it.
Yeah, it's really, it's an existential question of who am I apart from my roles, And it's a question we all grapple with. And I think that when you're dealing with chronic illness, that illness takes up the space. So questions like that are really, you don't have the time, energy, or resources to be concerned with. But once the illness goes into remission or you experience healing, those questions come back.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is once you're on that healing journey and you're no longer, you're still maybe affiliated or associated in those other communities, but now you're kind of moving into a newer chapter where some of that might carry over because you want to continue being a support for others or advocate in some way. but you're moving on to into these other aspects. And so then it's kind of a conversation you have within yourself. How much, now that I'm healthier, and it's not as obvious perhaps to the general public that I've had health issues, how much do I really want to like bring this into the new chapters in my life? Like, how public do I want to be about it? And that's a really tricky one, especially when you think about like the workplace. There can be a lot of stigma, being treated differently if you go into a workplace and then you get sick, and then you get accommodations at work, and you might not get treated equally. You might get passed for promotions because you're all of a sudden seen as not reliable or dependable or whatever, misunderstandings or that kind of can come up. And then when you get better, and let's say you've worked at that same place, then you get better and you're in remission or you're partially healed and this and that, and your doctor gives you a stamp of approval and says, hey, you can go back to work full time. Part of you is excited, like, great, like I feel like I'm getting back to my old self. But the other part of you might be really scared and go, gosh, I was working over 40 hours a week before I got sick, and maybe that's why I got sick.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that if I do that to myself again, I'm going to have a remission, or I'm going to end up back where I was before. And that's the scariest concern, I think, for a lot of people. It's like, and then that safety net that maybe was set in place while you were sick, whether it was with the doctor's notes and accommodations with work, but then they give you that seal of approval, and then all of those supports go away. So then if you're in that work environment and you're working full time, and then you start to have difficulties, and then you're having a hard time working those hours, what's your fallback? Then it's like trying to get all of that back into place to support you, and what your body is needing is going to take time, and that's scary. And how's work going to take that? Is your boss going to give you a hard time? Are you going to lose your job? I mean, you just never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking back to what you shared, Daniela, when you were talking about the example of if someone during their illness is actively involved in some type of community, that once you have gotten into a place of healing, there might be some awkwardness around interacting with those who haven't experienced healing. Mm-hmm. That might be where the person might feel, I don't know how to speak to this person who's still struggling. And the person who's still struggling might also feel some mixed emotions because this other person has gotten better. So you can just see how there's so many nuances to this.
Yeah. And if you're an overthinker, man, it can just, really, really be exhausting. It's like, just take a step back, it can be a slippery slope of like going into these, paths. It's like, it doesn't have to be this, deep, like, I'm here to help. I realize I'm in remission now, but I've learned a lot, and I'd like to be an asset and make myself useful to this nonprofit or whatever. But yeah, we can definitely go into that overthinking place, and that just like is exhausting. So it's hard not to do it, but it can happen. It can happen. So maybe if that's you can just ask somebody who you love and trust to say, hey, if you start seeing me do this to myself, can you just kind of like tap me on the shoulder and go, hey, snap out of it. Like, it's okay. You don't have to do it. It can feel like a lot of like an obligation. Like I hear this all the time. People who've gone through some kind of health crisis, especially if it's one that's hard to treat or no one's really heard of it. A lot of them end up becoming health coaches or something in the health field because they feel like that's their new purpose. And that's wonderful and great and beautiful because they get it from that perspective. And for those who maybe don't do that, they can still feel a sense of like, well, I was put through this for some reason. Like, what is the higher purpose? Like, what is the meaning? Like, this is not all for nothing. Like, how can I make meaning out of this experience? And so maybe it is with volunteering or doing some, being a part of a support community, just because otherwise it can kind of sometimes be hard to reconcile, whether you're religious or spiritual, if you're into that thinking of like, well, why did I go through this? What was the purpose,
Yeah. So Danielle, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and explore another aspect of this experience. And that would be kind of like what would be considered a shadow aspect. Shadow meaning something that's difficult to see. It can be a blind spot. And shadow also can be positive or negative. It depends on the individual who's experiencing this. What would you say are possible manifestations of a negative shadow experience for someone who is in this process of healing from chronic illness?
Gosh, this one's kind of hard. If I'm following you on this negative shadow, maybe it's like, what is it that I used to be able to do while I had health issues, and now it's a little bit more challenging now that I'm healthy? Is that kind of something you're...
In the sense of, when you describe that someone might ask, what's my higher purpose in all of
Mm,
this? And so that could be a manifestation of someone who has gone into the darkness, gone into the underworld, has suffered, has been through excruciating experiences, and they come through that and they say, okay, I was in that dark place, but I came back with this. And they bring whatever that is, some kind of
mm,
treasure or gift,
okay.
and they bring it back out of the underworld to the world, and whatever, and that world can be their
Mm,
family, it can be their community. It can, like your example of a lot of people who have been through this become coaches or healers themselves. So that would be, for example, a positive shadow experience.
okay, so the word gift is a really interesting one because it can definitely be a hot button for people in the community, I'd say. Some people, it just depends. It's all on a range here, but some people say, you know what, this, if I had to get sick over again, I would, or something like that. Some people, feel that way because by going through this, it taught me to be more patient with myself and to slow down. It forced me to not be a workaholic anymore. Like I literally had no other option. Like I had to
Right.
change my way of life. It was some higher being or my body just saying, if you
Yeah.
don't stop, you're gonna time out real quick. Like this is
Yeah.
not sustainable. So people who've gone through it helps. What it has forced many to do is to become more in tune with their bodies.
Right.
Um, that takes a while because
Mm-hmm.
when you're sick, the last thing you want to do is check in with your body and feel what your body's telling you because it's hurting all the time and it's not reliable and it's causing you all sorts of distress. So you're probably trying to avoid it. But after you come to terms with your situation and start to tune in to the signs and signals your body's kind of trying to communicate, it can really be refined. I know that was the case for me. It's like, trying different treatments, and it's like this one my body responded well to, this one not so much, and trying this different food and whatever. And so the same skill set, can easily carry over once you've made it into the healing phase. And you can continue that momentum of really being in tune with your body and going, oh, this I can tell this is like kind of activating me. Like I'm feeling more stressed, and this is really interesting. It's something to observe. Okay, something I got to work on, whatever it is, and having that kind of insight is really kind of a survival mechanism because you don't really, even if you're on the path of healing, you want to do your best to not let things really get under your skin. I mean, we're all human, but if someone's healthy and they get really agitated or angry about something or upset, okay, that's a horrible experience. But if you have a history of health issues and if you still have some health issues, it could land you like in bed for the next 3 days because your system
Right.
is just totally taxed and you could have a flare up. So I think some view it as a gift, others just view it as a survival mechanism of being more in tune just because they want to not have a relapse and they want to take care of themselves because they want to be like an independent person and be a parent and a spouse and a friend and, get back to living life.
Yeah, and I can relate to what you're saying in that, just having loved ones who have been through some type of illness and afterwards when they have gone through some healing, this realization that, oh, what happened to me, and that was a wake-up call. And if that hadn't happened, I could have continued down this path and maybe, like you said, I would have timed out. And so now there's this opportunity for me to really make some shifts in how I move through the world, how I respond to things, because like you said, when someone has been through some type of illness, that stress, that emotional charge really does set them back. And they have to they have to find a new way to respond to those types of experiences that provoke those feelings. And when those feelings come, really be able to manage them so that it doesn't set them back again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think another key part of it too is when you're on that healing journey and you're no longer like in the fog of being sick and stressed and just really upset about what's going on, you're able to also in that process slowly you kind of can, it's not always, but get into a place of being more compassionate towards yourself. And that can be really hard. It's actually, I find it with people in this community, it's easier for them to be compassionate toward each other. So if you're in a support group of some kind and you're with someone in their presence and they're going through it, you guys, you both might not have the same condition, but there's this understanding or a similar journey and a similar path of experiences. So it can really bring up a greater sense of compassion for others, which I think then can translate into being an advocate or a therapist or a coach or something to continue helping and support others. And in general, just being more understanding. So if you're out in the world and you see something or experience something in a setting, you're probably going to be less like jumping to conclusions and more like, oh, they must be going through a difficult day today, or I wonder if they have something with their health going on. Whereas if you hadn't had any kind of a health situation in your own life, you probably would just go, oh, that person's, I don't know what their problem is. They're just, I don't know. There could be some kind of a judgment call. And I have found that to be less often the case when you've been in that situation. And you might not know the person that you're seeing in the public, but there's like this just like hint of like, that might be going on. And gosh, I hope they'll be okay.
Daniela, what would your words of wisdom be for someone who has experienced some healing and finds themselves in this space that we've been talking about?
It is okay. It's okay to feel excited, scared. I mean, this is a new chapter and there are a lot of unknowns, like you've gone through life a certain way and set up people and support systems and routines to kind of accommodate where you were on your healing journey while you were sick. And now all of those pieces get to evolve again. And it's exciting and it's scary and it's okay. And it's like an awkward growing stage. It's like middle school.
Yeah, I love that.
It's like all sorts of awkwardness and cool experiences and like, oh, wow, I can go do all these things now. But how's this relationship gonna shift? Well, I'm not so sure. We'll have to figure it out and just talk about it. And that's okay. It's okay.
And what would your words of wisdom be for loved ones, family, and friends of someone who has gone through the healing process and now they find themselves in this space?
Yeah, at the same time, it's just like, it's okay. If you're feeling out of sorts and like, what's my purpose now in this relationship, or what is my role now? How do I fit into this equation? They're feeling it too. So just know you're not alone in it. It's a common experience, and just understand that it's okay and you can talk about it. The caregiver might feel really guilty to bring it up. So if anyone's going to bring it up, hopefully it's the person who's going through the healing now, because it kind of can give the caregiver permission to talk about it, because otherwise they might feel like, oh man, I'm such a jerk for saying this. I can't believe I'm saying this. They might not say anything. So I would say it would be best probably for the person healing to kind of initiate it and just like make it okay, to give them permission to feel what they feel and share what they're thinking.
Daniela, are there any tools, books, or resources that you can recommend?
There's so much. I would say one resource that's really nice I like is a website called The Mighty. And I don't know if I mentioned it in the last.
Yeah, you did. That's a good one.
Okay.
We can mention it again.
That's a good one. There's also one, I don't know if I mentioned this one either. So it's called But You Don't Look Sick.
I can't remember.
That one is it's a woman's personal website kind of chronicling her experiences with chronic illness. So, and then people can always go to my website. I've been better at writing more content specific to chronic illness, chronic pain, the process of being in that kind of place and also transitioning out of it. I wrote something recently, kind of like, moving past chronic illness and chronic pain and how to live life now, like what that experience is like and how to navigate relationships and things like that. So you can find a lot of information there as well.
And can you also share about your Facebook group?
Yeah, it's a newly formed Facebook group. So I've been all of this time. Oh, I'd also say this. One of the things that has forced me in a positive way when I was sick was to be really resourceful. So me getting to meet a lot of amazing therapists throughout the US, that opportunity kind of came up because it was hard for me to get out of the house and leave the house and live life like normal people do. And so I was on the internet quite a bit. And so that's kind of how I met Lourdes and a lot of other amazing therapists. And while in that space, I also helped kind of create this group for people who have a condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So that's a mouthful, and I won't get into the details, but it's one of those things that I'm now in remission for. And so I have since left that large group that was quite massive at over 20,000 members. And just a week ago, my colleague and I created our own group that we can do more of what we want to do to help support people going through the process of dealing with this condition and other co-occurring conditions. And it's just a volunteer thing. It's nothing related to my work as a therapist. They're completely separate. It's just me wearing my little advocacy hat. And it's really flourished. It's only been around a week, and we're almost at 1,000 members. So that's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
And yeah. So that's kind of, I think, my way of continuing to carry the torch and help people get the support they need in a way that also is healing for me, because maybe I didn't have all those resources at the time, but now I can offer it to others, which is really rewarding.
Daniela, thank you so much again for spending some time with me on this afternoon and sharing your deep insights and wisdom around a topic that I know is not really talked about and a lot of people struggle with, which is right in line with what, I have envisioned for Women in Depth. And these are the types of conversations that I think are important and need to happen. I think my takeaway from today is that you have really normalized a struggle that so many people have. And just doing that and letting people know this is what's happening and it's okay, that is profoundly healing just in and of itself.
Well, thank you. That's really nice to hear. And I'm glad that's the big takeaway, because that's the big message I'd like everyone to kind of hear. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to feel what you feel. It's allowed. You've been through a lot and you've come out the other side, and just go with it. You give yourself permission.
And I think to add to that too is what you've done is you've given them a roadmap for what happens, what can happen potentially and happens for many after healing. And so now it's something that perhaps someone can look at and say, okay, I know about this. This is part of the process, and it's just something I'm going through, and then the map will turn into something else. So, thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad we got to talk about this. So thank you.
Take care.
Okay, you too.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Daniela. One of the things that really stood out for me is how when you're ill, when you're not well, you have a certain relationship that you form with yourself. Your experience of yourself shifts when you're not well. And that when you get better, when you heal, your relationship also has to shift. You have to form a new relationship to yourself, a new way of being with this identity that is now very different from when the focus was on doctor's appointments and feeling better and medicines and everything involved with whatever the illness was. Another aspect that stood out for me is the importance of self-compassion during this process, because it can be very disorienting and confusing for everyone involved, for the person who has gotten better and for everyone around them. And finally, I'm really grateful that Daniela normalized this experience and described it in a way that those who go through this can see themselves in the experience, know what to expect, know how they can get stuck, and also have some tools to move through this in a productive and healthy way. For show notes to today's episode, please visit www.lourdesfiato.com/women-in-depth, where you will find links to all the resources mentioned, including a guided imagery handout, which is a nice complement to the guided meditation audio that you can receive when you sign up for Daniela's newsletter. So the links for Daniela's website will be in the show notes, and you can go to her website, sign up for the guided meditation, and also you can download from the show notes the guided imagery handout that goes with that meditation. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe on iTunes and share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.